Welcome into the Bubba Rose Show. What is going on, folks? We appreciate you tuning in whenever and however you're listening, whether it is on YouTube, Facebook, or one of our many audio-only platforms such as Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Anchor. Be sure to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you're tuned in. The next 3 episodes of the program are definitely must-listens for anyone who loves college baseball. Recently, I had an excellent conversation with college baseball Hall of Famer and Wichita State legend Gene Stephenson. When you think of the top college baseball coaches of all time, Stephenson is undoubtedly right there as one of the best. He had 1,837 victories, ranking third all time in Division I, behind only Mike Martin of Florida State and Augie Garrido, who did such a tremendous job at Texas, Cal State Fullerton, and Illinois. But one of the things that made what Coach Stephenson accomplished so impressive, you consider the situation he took over at Wichita State, essentially a blank canvas. And that program had been dropped on 2 occasions previously, the most recent being in 1970. So there were many obstacles to navigate when Gene Stephenson took over there in the latter part of 1977. Most people in the college baseball world and just the baseball world in general not only questioned Stephenson's decision, but many told him that he had a, quote, snowball's chance in hell of being successful at Wichita State. Stephenson and those shocker teams simply found a way to be successful and would not be denied. This extended conversation with Coach Stephenson is so great that I've split it up into 3 episodes of approximately 40 minutes apiece. We appreciate Coach being so generous with his time and so candid about his life and career. But right now, sit back, relax, maybe grab you something to drink, and here is part 1 of my 3-part conversation with college baseball and Wichita State Hall of Famer, Gene Stephenson. Very excited right now to be joined by a legend in the college baseball world. Very few folks won more games than this guy. I am joined by Wichita State Hall of Famer and also college baseball Hall of Famer, Gene Stephenson. Coach, welcome into the show.
Thank you, Bubba. Thank you.
Absolutely. We appreciate your
Weather,
time.
how's the weather in Charlotte? That's what I want to know.
It's cold, Coach, but not as cold as it is in Wichita.
I got up this morning, it was 11 degrees below zero.
Man.
And also, I want to tell you that it was 31 degrees below zero wind chill. And still zero in the temperature outside today, right now.
Yeah, I knew when we spoke a few days ago on the phone, Coach, you were talking about the snow on the ground and how it was right there in single digits. And I saw Kyle Peterson's tweet this morning talking about the weather in Omaha. The temperature was something like 13 below.
Yeah, when we were 11 below. And it was like, at the time, the problem is I think we got more snow than Omaha did. Somehow it came from the southwest, moving northeast and hit right through Wichita.
Yeah, he said 13 below, and then the wind chill was negative 27. He was joking. He said he said this is the day where you bust the hitters inside.
Yeah, if you could find a place to throw, yeah.
But no, Coach, really appreciate your time. Appreciate you coming on. But before we get to everything that you accomplished in your 36 years at Wichita State from 1978 to 2013, let's talk about your upbringing. I know you were born in Kansas, but you were raised in Guthrie, Oklahoma, which is about 50 miles north of Norman, something like that. Straight up I-35. So just talk about your childhood. I know you played multiple sports and you were a huge fan of Oklahoma Sooner football.
There you go. Well, I was born in Council Grove, Kansas. And the only reason that we came here, my dad was working at Harrington Army Airfield, which was there was no town in Harrington at that time, no hospital or anything. So I was born in Council Grove, which is the nearest town that had a hospital. And within a year, it was just after the World War II ended, within a year, we moved to back to Guthrie, because they were both, my mom and dad both from Guthrie, and spent my life there up until the time I left to go to college. Loved it.
So I talked about you being a huge Oklahoma Sooner fan. I mentioned you being a multi-sport athlete as well, and you were talking about Barry Switzer recruiting you to Arkansas. Is that right?
That's right. And a lot of people thought I was a lot better than I know I was. Okay, so they've made a big deal of it, and but I was recruited football by quite a few schools, and I'd never been on an airplane at that time, 17 years old or whatever. And so, and you weren't limited to 5 trips, paid trips then. So because I'd broken my big toe playing football, I was unable to play in my senior year of basketball. And so I just took trips most every weekend to go see places I'd never been before. And there was no doubt in my mind that I was going to go to OU. Bud Wilkinson was there. Eddie Crowder, I loved him. He was a recruiting coordinator. And that my high school football coach was Buddy Burris, who was a 3-time All-American at Oklahoma. And he was pushing me for that too. And so that's the way it was. I've been watching and listening to Oklahoma football since 1952 when I was 7 years old. And Billy Vessels, Buck McVale, Eddie Crowder, guys that were heroes in my mind. And I thought that's what I want to do. But at the time before it was time to commit, Bud Wilkinson announces that he's going to run for the Senate in 1964, and that 63 is his last year. And Eddie Crowder announces that he's going to become the head coach at Colorado. And wow, the other sport I was going to play for sure was baseball. And there are no full scholarships, of course, in baseball. And so there was no way in the world I was going to be able to afford to go to college without full scholarship. And so we got into the point where, what am I going to do? And Oklahoma's baseball was really bad at that time. And they only had, in the Big Eight, I think they had finished 8th 2 or 3 years in a row. So, and Missouri was one of the schools that was a lot better in baseball, and they were winning the conference pretty regular. And Dan Devine swayed my parents. He was a real gentleman, came down 3 different times, actually, after the season was over, to watch me run track, really, and play baseball. And I just decided with my parents that was the place I wanted to go. The funny thing about it is that I thought I wanted to be a journalist, a sports writer, or better yet, a color guy on TV and those kind of things. If I didn't make it in pro ball. And I always thought that that's what I wanted to do. And of course, Missouri had a really good journalism school. And I'd never heard myself speak. I'd never heard myself at all. But boy, did I get a rude awakening when I started to do the journalism classes and at Mizzou. And I heard myself for the first time talk. And I realized in my mind, you have no chance of anybody ever hiring you if you're going to think about going and being a color guy for television or radio, anything. So I didn't know anything else, so I had to change my major in the middle of my junior year to physical education to be a coach, because I didn't know anything else about, I'd done awfully well in school and all that, in high school and stuff, but my mind, was focused on playing ball and hoping I could be something else beyond, And so the end result was all the same. It's like I'm confused about what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go, and so I went to ROTC because we're in the middle 60s, and at that time, and I had ROTC in high school in Guthrie, so I wasn't worried about the military stuff, except I didn't really want to go to Vietnam because that was not the place to go, of course. So I got commissioned and graduated at Mizzou, and then I went to graduate school for just about another year, and I'd run out of time to do anything, so I went into the service at the end of 1968, and spent 2 years. Well, it was a 2-year tour, but at the same time, I was scheduled to go to Fort Bragg, I think, at the time, and then on to 6 weeks later, probably Vietnam. And I was not, I was not the strongest guy mentally about going to Vietnam. And I thought, I don't really know if that's the right thing we're doing there anyway. And, I was young and dumb. And I just thought I'd try to avoid going if I can. But so the military and general in Berlin called me after I had decided that I was going to enter the service, and to ask me if I would like to come and be the division baseball player coach and do the duty I'm supposed to do all the time, and then also be the assistant football coach. I wasn't going to play football anymore. I was done. So I thought, well, that sounds good, but you have to give me another year because it's a 3-year tour to go to Europe. Well, so I did, 3rd year. So I spent 2 years in Berlin, which for a lot of people don't understand how the thing was set up over there. They talked about the wall. They just thought it was a wall across a border, and it was in East and West Germany. But in Berlin, which was 200 miles inside the East German territory, the wall was built around West Berlin, which was the free part of Berlin. And so it was lots of territory. You could get yourself in trouble if you tried to travel very far. And it was a great experience. But at the end of the 2-year time, and I was hoping to get that 3rd year. Well, the 3rd year they sent me to Vietnam anyway. So that's after that. That's when I got the opportunity to go as a graduate assistant coach at Oklahoma in baseball for Enos Freeman, who was the head coach at that time. And a year later, after I was OU, Barry Switzer got the head football job. Chuck Fairbanks left and went to the New England Patriots. And within a couple of years after that, after he got the job, they changed the rules, NCAA, Title IX problems and all that. And so at that time, they had 16 full-time assistant coaches in football. And they were a very good team, obviously. So, but only 8 could stay and coach on the field. That was the new rule. With that done, 8 full-time coaches were looking for a job. Now, a lot of people wanted them because the team had been really good for a number of years. But you also had 3 positions that they allowed you to have as recruiter positions that could not coach on the field. Jerry Pettibone decided he was one of the full-time assistants. He decided that he was going to stay, but he was not going to be a coach on the field. He'd be the recruiting coordinator. And then we had 2 other spots. Barry couldn't fill them, both of them. So he asked me if I would be interested in recruiting football as a guy that went out to look at kids in the fall on Friday nights. And if certain guys that were baseball, football combinations around the country, if I would go recruit in that situation. So, it meant more money. So that's the only thing that was holding me back ever anyway. So for the last couple of years at Oklahoma, that's what I did also. And it was really good. And then we went 5 years in a row to the College World Series as a baseball team. But in those days, they weren't paying baseball coaches any money to speak of. And so consequently, guys held it, as long as they didn't cause any problems, they held the coaching jobs for 40 years or more. There weren't many openings coming along. So it was a tough situation because, I'd had a lot of experience in doing a lot of different things over my lifetime. And, I just felt like I was ready to be a head coach, but I couldn't get a job. And then all of a sudden, one of the things that struck my eye was that Wichita State was going to start baseball. Everybody said it was a dead-end job that talked with me, and the pro scouts, virtually to a man, said to me, "You have no chance there. I mean, there are no players in the area. They don't have a field. There's no money, and you can't make that work unless you can recruit from all over the country because there's not enough players in Kansas." And I got there and I realized when I took the job, I still was pretty stubborn. I thought, this is a chance to do something nobody else had ever done. So we went after it. And, but it was a lot worse than I even imagined because there were obviously no players on campus. Only 8%, I did a calculation, only 8% of the high schools in the state of Kansas even played high school baseball at that time. And obviously the ones that could play were picked off by KU and K-State. And if there ever was a really good prospect, well, he was going to go down to OU or he was going to go to Missouri or someplace like that. But it was an experience that I can't even begin to tell you. I'd spend probably the next 3 years sitting here every day talking to you about all the wild things that went on, the crazy things that we tried to do to build a program. But we never gave up. I'm going to tell you something else. I think three people were really instrumental in my lifetime of shaping me a little bit. One, of course, was my father. Now, he had quit school in the 7th grade, during the 7th grade year. Never went back, and that was the sum of his education. My mother, she quit school in her junior year, and she didn't graduate either. So they were obviously not poor. I mean, they're not poor in spirit, but very poor as far as finances. And we couldn't get upgrades or anything for any reason. So I grew up, him telling me, my dad, I want you to go to college. I don't care what it is. You can't go anywhere in this world if you don't go to college. And you've got to earn a scholarship, academic and or sports. But whatever it is, you've got to get your school paid for or work your way through. We can't afford to give you anything. I heard that from the time I was 8 or 9 years old. He had open heart surgery in 1954 when I just turned 9 years old. And it was the first of its kind in Oklahoma. It was the third of its kind in the United States. And he lived from that. It took 33 pints of blood transfusion to get through that operation. And today, of course, they do things similarly with no problem. But it was really a miracle that he survived. And he lived 18 years after that. And they cut him from the middle of his chest all the way through around to the spine. Took out 3 ribs permanently and cut all of his muscles in the back and everything. And then so he lost all the nerves feeling. But he never complained. I never heard that man ever complain once about either his plight or his pain. Never. And I thought, and there were a lot of things that he had problems with, but he never said a word about it. His statement that I always go with him always was this. He said, son, if you give your word to somebody about anything and you shake on it and you give him a firm handshake, you don't give him one of those dead fish, you let him know that you mean it, and you go to your grave to try to live up to that word. Don't ever give in. If you give your word, it means everything. The second guy that I would tell you that made a big difference to me was my football coach, Buddy Burris. His statement, when he took that job at Guthrie, they'd won one game in 3 years. Obviously, it wasn't a very good program, but he was going to try to build it. And we went from that to 500 team after that, and actually a team that was pretty good. But his statement, over and over again, he always said, if you commit to something and it gets tough and it gets difficult, no matter what, never, ever give up. Never, ever give up. If you made you give it everything you have, and don't ever give up, and don't quit. Don't ever quit. And that was his big deal about playing football, because we took some lumps early on. And then the third guy was a big deal to me was Enos Seymour. And I think the one thing, this guy had principles. He lived by a code. He was a guy that, by golly, he was going to give you his best and expected the very same from you. He had rules, and if you weren't going to live up to them, you weren't going to be around very long. So his statement to me was, something's either black or white. It's good or it's bad. There's no gray. We have a lot of that gray today in the world. You know that, right? So this guy was this type of person that there was either right or it's wrong. And my folks had brought me up the same way. But he said, the one thing you need to know, and you'll find as you go through life, it's always going to be harder to do the right thing. Always. If it's a difficult decision, you know right from wrong, but it's always harder. And the way people justify doing the wrong thing, he said, is, well, everybody else does it. You ever heard that phrase before? Everybody else does it. Well, that doesn't make it right. Okay? And that's the one thing that was struck onto me from early on as a coach. And I think definitely coming to Wichita State with nothing, I was baking, counting the football end of it, and the extra benefits and stuff, probably in the neighborhood of 35,000 at that time, which doesn't sound like much now, but it was a really good salary for an assistant baseball coach and football recruiter. It was good. But just, before anybody ever thinks that I'm a smart guy, because I just let this out of the bag right here. I took the job at Wichita State for $1,000 a month, 1 month at a time. No more, hopefully no less. But there was nothing else. No players, no equipment, a total of 4 scholarships offered for the first time ever. And most people would say that. All the pro scouts told me the same thing. It kind of got out real quick. They'd say, Coach or son or Gene or whatever they wanted to call me, you don't have a snowball's chance in hell of that ever working at Wichita. They've never had it. They tried to bring it back a couple of times, never worked. Why are you leaving? Well, because I'm not the smartest guy on the block, but I'm stubborn. And we decided we were going to do our best. So we went, and that's what it was. 1 month at a time, $1,000. And they could drop it any time. Pretty tough start. Pretty tough.
Absolutely. Now, before we can get back to that,
you asked a question and I went on too long. Okay,
no problem. It was a great answer, great information, Coach. And before we get back to the blank canvas and uphill battle you were facing at Wichita with a lot of those variables you just mentioned, let's go back to your OU experience. I wanted you to tell our listeners about the scholarship situation back then in college baseball. I know it's a lot better, at least at Oklahoma, than what it is now with the 11.7 scholarship. So if you would touch on that, and then you've talked about how Coach Seymour was so impactful on your career, but also talk about how your recruiting experience with OU football prepared you for all the recruiting you needed to do and just selling the Wichita State program once you got there.
Yes, I don't think anything that you do, if you're going to make a great best effort at it, you're going to have to be a guy who is 100% into it and doesn't look for reasons why you can quit. The quitting and giving up was never, ever in our vocabulary. So we decided that we were going to come in and do the best job we could do in as short a time as possible. I remember my first interview with the press. I actually said, in 4 years, we're going to be in a position to challenge to go to the College World Series. And I bet you 99.44% of guys that were reading and listening to that thought, holy cow, we got another guy who's just blowing smoke, just like we've heard before, from football or from the athletic director or what. So, but I meant it. And you know what? 4 years after we put that first team on the field, we were not only challenging for the College World Series the 2 years before that and the year before that also, but we made it. And we got to the championship game in 1982. And back home, we have a field, chain link fence around it, no seats. We just put in dugouts, permanent dugouts for the first time the year before that, in the third year. No permanent seats until after the 82 season was over, before the 83 season started. That 82 team won 73 games, beat everybody in the country. And at the College World Series, we beat everybody there, except that I think was better than Miami. And I told Skip Bertman was assistant at that time. I told him, there's no doubt in my mind, but we beat Fullerton, we beat Oklahoma State, we beat Texas, and they were all better than Fullerton. I mean, better than Miami, but we couldn't beat Miami. So we lost the championship. Now, again, it was a great situation for a challenger. I mean, a guy that's going to have to compete and build every day. We had good players. We developed good players. But again, the scholarship situation at OU, when I left there, when I started there, they had 25 fulls in baseball, probably 200 plus in football. There were no limits at that time, and the Big Eight had built up big-time football, and they wanted baseball at Oklahoma to be good. And at that time, Enos was giving back 9 scholarships. He was only using 16, and we didn't have quite enough pitchers to compete with the big boys, Texas, Arizona State, Southern Cal, whatever at that time. But we quickly turned that around. Very first year, recruiting guys, getting the guys in. We recruited. We didn't lose but one pitcher on our staff in 1972 for the 73 season, but I went out and recruited 7 more pitchers, all on scholarship. And that made a big difference. And suddenly we were right there at the College World Series all the time. At Wichita State, I said we only had 4, and everybody else had more, but they didn't have a total. At that time, in 1977, 78, what in that area, they had limited the scholarships to 19 across the country. When I first started at Oklahoma, people like Arizona State had 40, 45 fulls. No wonder they were pretty good. Southern Cal had everybody on full. If he wanted to bring in 100, he had them. Rod Dado was a multi-millionaire with a trucking company. And he didn't have to answer for whose scholarships he was given because nobody really cared, you know. Anyway, it all changed in 1976, 77. They started making limits. And then shortly after that, they cut them some more because it was all about Title IX problems, all about trying to make sure the women got exactly the same amount of help in those sports or corresponding sports. So it created a different situation. And we never had a full complement of scholarships. It went from 19 and eventually down to 13. But I remember in the 1988 season, we're in the College World Series, and we didn't have a full complement of scholarships. We had 13. We didn't have 13 was the limit, but we had about 11 and a half maybe, all told. But then they cut again after the 88 season, I believe it was, to 89, and they cut it to 11.7, I think. No, take that back. It was cut it from 19 to 13 in 88 or 80 in the 80s, and 13 was what it was. And that when they cut it back to that point for the 88-89 season to 13 scholarships, we didn't worry because we'd never been at 13 anyway. We were still at about 11. at that point. So later on, they cut the scholarships even more to 11.7. And how they ever got to that total, that was hard to believe, but it's true. It was truly 1/10 of what each of the non-revenue producing sports had, is what it means. If baseball had 13, I think softball had 14, basketball, and same type of situation. But with us, it never mattered because we weren't there yet at Wichita State anyway. But when they cut back to 11.7, now this was about, I want to say about 91, maybe 90, something like that. You have to check me on that. But they had they had everybody had been cut 1/10 is what it amounted to. That's how it got. Baseball was 13 before, and it went down 1.3 to 11.7. And so that's how it got to 11.7, and they've stayed that way, all the rest of my time when we're coaching. And you talk about difficult to field a team and to try to get players that we never cut a scholarship off a kid who was doing all right in school, who was trying his best on the field, and never being a problem. I always told our parents that we're talking to, we're recruiting, we're making this offer to you. I know you're being offered more because it was a part, you're offered more somewhere else, but I promise you this, he comes here, he does okay in school, does what he's supposed to do, and does on the field, doesn't matter whether he is a great performer or not. I expect he will be, but doesn't matter. We're not going to cut his scholarship. Never reduce a guy, never reduce. And I know we're in the very extreme minority, but we never reduced a guy scholarship at all. Now, if he had done something bad, very rarely off the field, he cut himself, because we're not going to keep guys that are bad citizens, bad actors, and all that. So it went down from that to 11.7, and I guess that's where it is still today, right?
It is still at 11
Hard to believe.
scholarships, and coaches pleading for more. We'll see if that happens, as well as that third full-time assistant. Right now, you have the two assistants, and then also the volunteer assistant.
It's a tough deal, but when I come to Wichita in the first place, we didn't have any assistant. We had I had a volunteer. We didn't call him volunteer. We call him graduate assistant, and I scrounged up $1,000 a year, maybe, to help him somehow. It was tough. I mean, you think it's tough now. It was a lot tougher then. And because there were no limits except by what the school did. And of course, Wichita State didn't have any money, couldn't do it. Okay. Now, to date or not?
I'm sorry.
Are we up to date now? I've dragged this out a long way out.
No problem at all. But before we dive a little bit deeper into your time at Wichita State and talk about some of those tremendous teams you fielded, you were talking about recruiting dual sport athletes at OU. For the modern sports fan, you think of a guy like quarterback Kyler Murray, who's now in the NFL. He played baseball for the Sooners. So just talk about maybe are there some names that you can spit out at us that played football and baseball for the Sooners during your time there when you guys went to 5 straight College World Series?
Well, some old timers, that you might remember at Oklahoma. Mickey Hatcher. Mickey Hatcher was, when the Dodgers won in '88, Mickey Hatcher hit a home run in that game also and got him closer, one step closer before Gibson hit his famous home run, to win it. But Mickey Hatcher was a third baseman combination player. but he was a football player at OU, and he was split end, and he was also the punter. But he was going to class, going to school was not really part of his background. He was a happy-go-lucky guy, and nothing ever bothered him. He was always going to keep going and keep working. But the one thing we had to do at Oklahoma to start with was make sure that he did what he needed to do. And one of the things after football practice, I was still there. I didn't leave OU until the February of '77. And Mickey, I brought in from football on a football ship the previous year, and he just finished his first year at OU in football in 1976 and junior college. And so he was now going to play the '77 season. So I really never got to coach him in baseball. But we brought him there and went through the recruiting process, so I was very much involved with that. But the one thing about Mickey was that he loved to work out, loved to work things that he loved to do. He would finish football practice that fall every day, come over in his football pads, take off his shoulder pads, take off his shoes, and hit barefooted in those clay cages off guys either throwing to him or whatever. And, I just thought he had boundless energy. Now, his energy of going to class, he'd be the first to tell you, may have needed a lot of help. But we had to make sure that he went to class because otherwise he was not going to make it in school. So that was one guy that sticks out most of all. Another guy that people might remember because he's still a good friend of mine was J.C. Watts. Now, he was not a baseball player per se, but he was a darn good football player and a quarterback. Two-time most valuable player in the Orange Bowl, 79 and 80. I got the opportunity to recruit him, and he stayed. And I really thought when he ran for Congress and was a 4-time congressman from Oklahoma, I really thought that he had the best chance of anybody to be the first Black president of the United States of America. That's how good and solid that young man was. But again, he chose to get out of politics after 4 terms because it was not, it is what it is today, okay? You don't know what's going on. You don't know why. You just know that you're going to have to play ball with the guys that have been there for so long if you're going to get on committees that matter. And that young man, he's 63 years old, I think now, but this guy is salt of the earth. This guy is, I would do anything for. He's a wonderful guy, worked hard with his life. He's just one of the favorites of mine. Really good man.
Coach, before we get to my next question.
Watts, a quarterback. J.C. Watts, quarterback.
Yes, sir. I've seen a lot of those old Orange Bowl films, and definitely well aware of J.C. Watts, even though that was before my time. I was born in '81, but
I grew before your time then, yeah.
But I've seen those old Orange Bowl films on ESPN Classic and so forth, and definitely, like you mentioned, I was well aware of his time.
He played with Billy Sims. You heard of Billy Sims, haven't you?
Absolutely.
Heisman Trophy winner. Yeah.
That concludes this edition of the Bubba Rose Show. We appreciate you tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you listen. Also, be sure to follow us on social media at Bubba Rosenbaum on Twitter, at Bubba Rose Show on Instagram. Like and follow the Bubba Rose Show Facebook page, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Let us hear from you by emailing us at thebubbaroseshow@gmail.com. Again, that's thebubbaroseshow@gmail.com. We'll talk to you next time, y'all.